What's up guys? How you doing? Welcome back to my channel. Super excited for today's video. I'm going to be giving you a bunch of fall book recommendations, books that are just full of that fall vibe and a bunch of different genres. And then at the end, I'm going to be showing you my fall TBR, which is quite expansive. So I have no idea if I'm actually going to be able to get through all of these, but that's the point of the TBR, is just setting up a bunch of goals and seeing if we accomplish them. It is about 80 degrees in New York today. We are still kind of in that heat wave that has been happening, but I'm wearing a sweatshirt. I'm trying to ring in that fall autumn spirit. Hasn't quite happened yet, but I'm trying. I'm really trying. So I'm excited for fall. I love fall. And this is actually my first ever autumn season that I'm not going back to school. I'm just working as a full-on adult now, which just feels crazy. Because of that, I feel like I have a little bit more time to read versus when I was a student. So I'm super excited about that, which again, hopefully that means I get through a lot of my TBR. But all that to say, let's get into some of these recommendations. Super excited to show you, so let's just hop right on in. Okay, so I've got a bunch of different genres that I want to recommend, but my largest list is fantasy. I'm a girly who loves fantasy year-round, but I do feel like fantasy just encompasses fall. It's like very cozy and fun to read about adventures. Fantasy has that fall vibe. So I've got a lot of really awesome recommendations. We're gonna start with one of my most recent reads, The Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves duology by Mary E. Pearson. These books are amazing. I gave Dance of Thieves a 4-star and Vow of Thieves a 5-star, but as a duology, it was amazing. This just had the most cozy vibes. I loved the characters, and a lot of the time we're kind of out in nature, and I don't believe any specific season is mentioned, but to me it just felt a lot like fall. And while there are some high stakes in this, it just felt like something I could cuddle up and read these books and, you know, have on some like cool fantasy music on in the background and just really sit down and enjoy these books. So Dance of Thieves duology, for sure, a fall fantasy vibe. The next books I'm recommending is the Caraval Trilogy by Stephanie Garber. I loved these. I feel like her Caraval trilogy has a little bit of mixed reviews, but I personally loved them. The first book I just felt like I dove right into. This is a series that has like a mystical, magical carnival slash, it's called Caraval, and it just pops up whenever. It's all about mystery and misdirect, and we follow a couple main characters and we have a couple different points of views in the different books. I just absolutely loved this trilogy, and I think that the vibes of these, where it's like mystery and intrigue, but we're at a carnival, like, I don't know, it just gives fall. And also all of these covers, I love that they're all kind of in those like dark tones. So again, these are the kind of books that I could just cuddle up and read in the fall with some like fun music in the background. Next up, I'm going to be recommending you guys The Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom duology by Leigh Bardugo. These are amazing. They're so intriguing. They are a bunch of characters that go on heists and a bunch of adventures ensue. This cast of characters, we get all of their points of view, and it's so fascinating. And it's such a great found family trope, which is one of my favorite tropes. But we're kind of set in this world that it's kind of, I don't want to say grimy, that's not quite the right word, but it's very, there's adventure around every corner, and there's a bunch of just intrigue. And I don't want to give too much away, because if you haven't read these, they're so worth your time. They're amazing. And there is a show on Netflix that is this duology and her other series kind of mashed together. But I think it'd be so fun to reread these personally for me and then watch the show all over again. But yeah, these books are amazing, and I just can't recommend these enough. Okay, I've got another duology for y'all, and this was, again, a more recent read for me, and I'm just already obsessed. That is The Name of the Wind and A Wise Man's Fear. Now, this is pretty high fantasy, and I was a little bit nervous going into it because a lot of the fantasy I read getting up to these was more YA, very simple for the most part. But these were so good. Now, it is an unfinished trilogy. Most of the fans have been waiting for, I believe, 11 years for the third book to come out, so hopefully it comes out soon. No idea though, but I would still say that these books are so worth your time. We follow a character named Kvothe, and he is this magical young boy and ends up going to a university, and just a bunch of adventures ensue. There's a pretty interesting villain, and a lot of this story kind of jumps back and forth from past and present. So we also have kind of this tavern vibe where we get a lot of his backstory, and you're just chilling in a tavern. And again, just kind of those cozy, not completely cozy, because there is a lot of adventure that goes down, but again, the vibes, I can't really explain it, but I just think that these are perfect for the fall. I kind of wish I had saved these for October. I am super glad I read them though, but yeah, this is kind of given like October, November vibes. I don't think that I could get past the fantasy recommendations without mentioning Fourth Wing, which is one of the biggest books of 2023 so far. It's all about dragons. I am recommending this because I think that the magical like world that we're in this book, it's not like we're set in fall, but we are set at the beginning of a school year, which, you know, going back to school in the fall, we have a bunch of dragons, a bunch of like cool adventures that go down. And I don't want to give too much away if you have not read this book yet. I do think it is well worth your time to dive into, and the sequel is coming out in November. So perfect timing to read this book in September, October, and then be able to jump right into the sequel as soon as it comes out. So if you have not read Fourth Wing yet, I cannot highly recommend it enough. It was such a cool story, and yeah, dive right into this one and then you can read the sequel in November. The last book that I'm going to recommend in my fantasy genre is actually The Hobbit, which I feel like might scare a couple people away because, oh, it's, you know, kind of that old-timey fantasy, but I promise that this is actually a pretty easy read, and you're going to have a great time with this. Most of it is just going on an adventure, and we follow our main character, Bilbo Baggins, and a bunch of dwarf friends of his, and there is a dragon. So if you're into dragons and fantasy, you're gonna get a great dragon in this book, and it gives you an opportunity to read a classic. And again, I think that this is a perfect fall read. Put on some cool music, maybe put on the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, cozy up, or read The Hobbit. It is not too long, but I promise you can do it. I promise that this is a well worth read and great for the fall. Okay, I'm kind of staying in the fantasy world for just a bit longer, and I'm recommending two historical fantasies. The first one is Babel by Rf Quang. This is another recent read for me. I read it in my 24-hour readathon, which was my most recent video. This is set in Oxford, in like the 1830s or 40s, and we follow a cast of characters that deals with the idea of colonization in Europe and the consequences that go along with that, but the magic system is super cool, and I just loved this book. And of course, the idea of like going to Oxford, going back to school, it's giving dark academia. It's perfect for fall. The last book in my historical fantasy recommendations is Divine Rivals. I do not have the physical copy. I read this on my Kindle, and it is available on Kindle Unlimited, so grab that while you can. I loved this book. This is a historical fiction, again, set in like the 1800s, and it has like a cool dark academia vibe. There's like typewriters and, you know, old-timey like reporters. It's a beautiful love story, and I just loved this book. Okay, next up, I'm gonna recommend two books that are in the historical fiction genre, and the first one up is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Dwyer. And I'm super excited to recommend this book because Netflix is actually making a movie on this book, and it's coming out in the fall. I'm not sure quite when, I think October or November, but perfect time to dive into this book and then watch the movie. This book follows two young kids. We follow a young German boy and a young French girl who is blind, and their story ends up kind of weaving together and in a really beautiful way throughout this book. And Anthony uses a lot of beautiful metaphors and lyricism in this book, so I would highly recommend this one if you are into historical fiction or interested in getting into that genre. This is a great introduction to that. The next book that I am recommending, I don't have physically with me, and I'm so sad about it. It is actually at my parents' home, probably in the attic somewhere, and I think I'm gonna bring it up here the next time that I visit them. But that is The Book Thief by Mark Suzak. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It is definitely on my 6-star reads. This is a book that, again, is centered around World War II and the Holocaust, but we follow a young girl, and her story is narrated by Death, which is such an intriguing way to look at the world. When we're looking at it through Death's eyes, it is actually quite comforting, and the story is just heartbreaking. It will break your heart. So if you want a really good book that will make you cry, that's the one for you. I think for the fall and for the historical fiction vibes, if that is a genre you're interested in, you have to check out The Book Thief. Okay, I've got 2 dystopian books to recommend, and the first one is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. And of course, this is the perfect time to read this book. The movie comes out in November. I am so excited. I cannot wait to see that movie and see what they've done with this story. But this book is a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, if you don't know, and it follows a young Coriolanus Snow who eventually is the president of Panem in the Hunger Games trilogy. This book may not necessarily be set in the fall, but now is the perfect time to read it if you haven't. That way you're fully prepared to go and watch this movie. And I do think that this is a well worth read, and I think I'm going to be rereading it before the movie comes out. So I'm super excited about that, and this is definitely the perfect time to read this book. The second dystopian book I'm going to be recommending is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This is another recent read for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book. This is set in a dystopian world where all disease and illness, even death, has been cured, and so the only people that can actually is these characters named Scythes. These 2 young kids are selected to join the program and learn all about it. It really dives into the idea of what it means to be mortal, immortal, and the consequences that come with living, in a sense. If you're looking for dystopian, I think this is a great time to read this book. The last book that I am going to be recommending, and the only book that is actually on my thrillers list, which is pretty surprising since we are going into the fall and October seems like a great time to read some thrillers. I just have not read enough thrillers, so I really only have one to recommend to you all, but that is The Maidens by Alex Michaelandes. This book is, again, dark academia vibes. We follow a professor and a student and this mom, and there's a mystery that goes down, and it definitely takes a lot of twists and turns, but again, thriller, dark academia, that idea of like going back to school. Really good book, definitely had a plot twist I was not expecting. So if you're into thrillers, this is a great one to check out. If you're not into thrillers, but you like dark academia, this is another great recommendation. And I'm sorry I don't have any more thrillers to recommend. I just seriously have not read that many, but that is a great one for thrillers in the fall. Okay, now it's time to get into my fall TBR. So these are all books I have not read, but are on my radar for the fall. I have no idea if I'm going to get to all of them, especially because I love to do monthly TBR videos where I select a TBR and I try to stick to that. But these are all books that I would love to get to, and so we'll see if it ends up happening. First up, I'll dive into the fantasies that I want to read, starting off with The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I have this whole trilogy. I've heard nothing but amazing things. From what I understand, people say this is a great fall read, great fall trilogy. I genuinely have no idea what it's about, and I love going into books blind, so that sounds like a great time to me. Again, this is just a fantasy series I've been wanting to get to for a while, and fall just seems like the right time, so we'll see if this actually happens. Next up, because I recommended the Caraval trilogy to y'all, I want to read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I've heard only amazing things about this book. It is a standalone fantasy, so there is no world and huge series that I have to dive into, but I hear that this gives a lot of Caraval vibes, where it's a mysterious circus that just shows up out of the blue. So again, given fall vibes, and I look forward to reading this one. A series that I really want to dive into is the Shadow and Bone trilogy. This is in the same world as the Six of Crows duology, and the Netflix show that I mentioned earlier actually follows both series. You can read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom as its own duology, but I would really love to get into these books. This is a trilogy that has been on my radar for a long time. I own all 3 books. I really want to read these. And while this does have some mixed reviews, I love the show and I love the characters, and I really want to read the books and form my own opinion. So again, we'll see if I get to it this fall, but I really, really want to read this trilogy. Okay, next up on my list is to actually read the entire Harry Potter series. I was going to recommend this first one in my recommendations, but I felt like it was a bit unfair since I've only ever read the first book. So this one will be a reread for me, but the rest of the series will be a first time read for me. And come on, Harry Potter is fall like encompassed, y'all. So it is time for me to finally finally read this series. So I'm looking forward to the reread of this and then diving into the rest of the series. That is definitely on my immediate TBR. I'm gonna make it happen. It's finally gonna happen, and I'm super, super excited about it. The last of the fantasies that I would love to get into is the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which would be a reread for me. I love this series with my whole heart, but my plan is to dive back into them and annotate them and just take my time with these books. So these will probably be reads with other books that I'm reading. So these will be books that I just really take my time, and I want to reread these so bad, and it will happen. Even if I only read the first Lord of the Rings book, I'm gonna make it happen. It is a huge goal of mine, and yeah, I can't wait to get back into this world. I just love this world and these characters so much. So I'm really looking forward to getting back into Lord of the Rings. A couple of YA thrillers, but just also mysteries that I want to get into. The first one is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Now, I did select this on my September TBR, and so I'm going to try to get to this month. And I do own the second book. However, I believe it is a trilogy, so we'll see what happens. But again, I just feel like this is meant for the fall, and I want to get into it. This is one of those OG book talk recommendations, and it's finally time that I read this. So this is definitely a book that is high up on my TBR right now, and so I'm going to do my absolute best to get to this one and perhaps the rest of the series. And then I finally have to / want to get into the Inheritance Games trilogy. I own the first 2 books. I do not own the 3rd book. I was waiting for it to come out in paperback, and it finally has, but I'm still gonna hold off until I read these 2 books. But I'm really excited to get into these. It's set, I believe, even in the fall, and people say if you like Knives Out, this is the perfect read, and I love that movie. That's one of my favorites. So I really want to get to these this fall. Maybe this will be on my October TBR, but we'll find out. I've got 2 thrillers / mysteries that I really want to read. The first one is on my TBR for September, and that is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. I'm trying to get to this one. I think it'll be a pretty quick read. It is not that long, but I definitely want to get to this book. And again, I haven't read a lot of thrillers, so I think this would be a great one to get into this September or October. Next up for my thrillers, I really want to get into Stephen King's The Institute. This is the only other Stephen King book that I own. I am currently in the middle of 11/22/63 by Stephen King, but that is not a horror or thriller at all. In fact, it's more of a historical fiction with a little bit of time travel element in it. I think it's a great introduction to Stephen King, but this I think is going to start entering that kind of thriller world that I'm very interested in. So again, I feel like this is the perfect time to read this. Hopefully I get to this in October or November. The final book that is on my TBR for the fall is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I have not read that many classics in my life, and Jane Eyre is certainly one of them that I know I want to get to. I feel like the fall is a great time for this book. To my understanding, a lot of it is set in a school, and then it's kind of set in a spooky house where there's a lot of mystery going down with perhaps somebody in the attic. So again, I feel like Jane Eyre, while it's a classic, it kind of gives thriller vibes a little bit. So I feel like this would be a great mix of a thriller and a classic to read. Okay, so I think I have thoroughly destroyed my bookshelves enough by pulling these all off the shelves, so I'm gonna call it on today's video, but I really hope y'all enjoyed. It was such fun to recommend all of these books and then show y'all all the books that are on my fall TBR, which again, I may or may not get to. We will find out. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know if you have any recommendations of books that are on your fall TBR. I would love to know, and of course, don't forget to do the typical YouTube things like comment, subscribe, all the fun stuff. I look forward to continuing to upload new videos. I'm looking forward to doing maybe more readathons, maybe some vlogs, and of course, just more in general book videos. So I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.